One of the most iconic figures of the British monarchy is Queen Elizabeth Lyon, later known as the Queen Mother of the United Kingdom, who lived for over a century, marked by some of the most pivotal moments in British history. Born in 1900 into an aristocratic family, she witnessed 2 world wars, the abdication of a king, the unexpected accession of her husband to the throne, and the consolidation of her daughter, Elizabeth II, as a central figure of the monarchy. From her childhood spent between the castles of England and Scotland to her crucial role during the dark years of the Second World War, Elizabeth developed a strong, empathetic, and determined personality that made her one of the most respected faces of the British crown. Her life was not without tragedy. She lost a brother on the front lines, faced the early death of her husband, King George VI, endured the loss of her daughter Margaret, and attended the funeral of Princess Diana in her old age. She also confronted and overcame 2 cancer diagnoses, one of the colon in 1966 and another of the breast in 1984. Despite these personal challenges, she maintained an image of stability, duty, and dignity. Over the course of more than 100 years, Elizabeth witnessed profound social and political transformations, being a key figure in adapting the monarchy to modern times. Before continuing with this fascinating biography, we invite you to subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell so you don't miss any of our videos. Without further ado, let's begin. Elizabeth Angela Marguerite Lyon was born on the 4th of August 1900 at St. Paul's Walden Bury, a country house located in Hertfordshire, England. She was the 9th of 10 children born to Claude Lyon, who at the time held the title of Lord Glamis and would later become the 14th Earl of Strathmore and Kinghorn, and Cecilia Cavendish Bentinck, a descendant of the British aristocracy and great-granddaughter of the 1st Duke of Portland. Elizabeth was born into a family with deep Scottish and English roots, and her lineage linked her indirectly to royalty through several generations of nobility. Her christening took place at the parish church of All Saints in St. Paul's Walden, and her godparents were close members of her extended noble family. From the outset, her environment was shaped by traditional values, Anglican religiosity, and strict social etiquette. The Lyon family held a stable and respected position within the British nobility, although they were not directly part of the royal court. The house where she was born would be remembered by her as a place full of family memories and rural tranquility. Elizabeth spent her childhood alternating between St. Paul's Walden Bury in England and Glamis Castle, the ancestral Scottish residence of the Lyon family, located in the county of Angus. Her early years unfolded in a typically aristocratic setting, surrounded by gardens, Victorian drawing rooms, hunting dogs, and formal customs. Although the family employed maids and household staff, the relationship between parents and children was close and affectionate. Her parents encouraged strong bonds among the siblings, who shared outdoor games, excursions through the Scottish countryside, and family celebrations that followed a strict seasonal calendar. Elizabeth received her education at home, as was customary for girls of her social standing, under the guidance of private governesses. She studied French, British history, classical literature, music, and Anglican religion. Her character was described even then as cheerful, witty, and empathetic. From a very young age, she showed great skill in building personal relationships, a quality that would later prove crucial in her public life. She also developed a deep love for Scotland, especially for Glamis Castle, which she would always consider her true home. When the First World War broke out in 1914, Elizabeth was 14 years old. The conflict profoundly affected all British social classes, including the aristocracy. Glamis Castle was converted into an auxiliary hospital to receive wounded soldiers, as a contribution to the United Kingdom's war effort. Elizabeth's mother, Countess Cecilia, organized the hospital operations with notable efficiency, and her daughters, including Elizabeth, actively contributed in logistical tasks. Although she had no medical training, Elizabeth undertook administrative duties, distributed supplies and accompanied recovering soldiers, often reading aloud to them or simply keeping them company. This voluntary work was her first direct encounter with large-scale human suffering. She also witnessed the psychological toll the war took on the soldiers, something that deeply marked her. The experience of war within her own home strengthened her sense of duty, resilience, and compassion for others. Despite her youth, she was not treated condescendingly, and earned the respect of both the medical staff and soldiers for her discipline and humane attitude. One of the most devastating blows to the family during the war was the death in combat of Fergus, Elizabeth's elder brother, who was killed on the 27th of September 1915 during the Battle of Lyon, in northern France. Fergus was 26 years old and served as a captain in the 8th Battalion of the Black Watch Regiment. His death was especially painful not only because of the familial bond, but also because Fergus's body was never recovered, leaving the family without the possibility of a traditional burial. His name was inscribed on the Lyon Memorial, where thousands of missing soldiers are commemorated. Elizabeth, who was 15 at the time, was deeply affected. Unlike other family bereavements, this loss occurred within a broader context of national tragedy, which reshaped her views on duty, patriotism, and sacrifice. Fergus's memory would be permanently honored at Glamis, where his room was preserved untouched for decades. For Elizabeth, her brother's death symbolized the brutality of war and reinforced her lifelong respect for the armed forces. After the trauma of the war and the loss of her brother, Elizabeth spent a brief period in London between 1916 and 1917, where she undertook a series of private courses in literature, history, and languages with individual tutors. Unlike most women of her class, who were usually limited to a domestic education, she expressed a genuine desire to broaden her understanding of the world. She did not attend a university or formal college, but these studies marked her first contact with intellectual circles. She lived temporarily in a residence near Kensington Gardens, from where she had access to private libraries, museums, and lectures. This period was discreet, without academic aspirations, but it allowed her to develop a wider view of European history and the role of the monarchy in times of crisis. Her cultural interests also expanded to include poetry and French literature. She frequently attended art exhibitions or concerts, accompanied by a lady-in-waiting. Though brief, this educational experience left a significant mark on her personal development, strengthening her eloquence, her sharp sense of humor, and her keen powers of observation, qualities that would distinguish her decades later as a public figure. In the year 1920, Elizabeth was invited to a social reception organized by Lady Strathmore in London, where she met Prince Albert, Duke of York, for the first time, the second son of King George V and Queen Mary. Albert was 24, and she was 19. This first encounter was not an official royal introduction, but took place in a relaxed setting among members of the aristocracy. However, for Prince Albert it was a defining moment. He was deeply impressed by Elizabeth's natural charm, intelligence, and warmth. She was not intimidated by his title or position, which, paradoxically, only increased the young prince's interest in her. In contrast to the court ladies he had previously met, Elizabeth was frank, possessed a good sense of humor, and could converse without formality. From that moment onwards, Albert began to show growing interest in her, regularly attending events where he knew she would be present. Nevertheless, Elizabeth showed no intention at the time of beginning a formal relationship. To her, the prince represented a distant respect, and she had not yet considered the idea of entering the royal sphere. Over the following years, Albert's admiration for Elizabeth deepened into a profound affection. In early 1921, after several months of meeting at social gatherings and discreet visits to Glamis Castle, the Duke of York proposed marriage to her for the first time. Elizabeth, though flattered, declined the proposal politely but firmly. She explained that she did not desire a public life or to submit to the strict discipline of court. She greatly valued her independence and feared losing her privacy and individuality within an institution that, to her, seemed rigid and oppressive. Despite the rejection, Albert did not give up. He continued his courtship consistently, but always respectfully. In 1922, he proposed again, convinced that she was the partner he needed, not only out of love, but for the balance and humanity she could bring to his life. Once again, Elizabeth refused, although this time she showed signs of hesitation. She recognized the prince's sincerity and nobility, but still did not feel ready to accept the role that came with marrying a son of the king. This second refusal was deeply painful for Albert, who confided to his inner circle that he did not wish to marry anyone else. The press never learned of these proposals, as they were handled with the utmost discretion within aristocratic circles. After years of reflection and hesitation, Elizabeth changed her mind in January 1923 and accepted Prince Albert's third marriage proposal. The decision was not impulsive, but the result of deep thought. Elizabeth understood that the prince was not seeking a decorative wife, but an ally who could support him in both public duties and personal life. Over time, she had come to know the man behind the title, a shy individual, deeply loyal, principled, and with a strong sense of duty. She also knew that Albert was not the heir to the throne, which implied a less publicly exposed life, something that offered her a degree of privacy. The official engagement announcement was made public on the 15th of January, 1923, generating great enthusiasm among the more traditional sectors of British society. Queen Mary, Albert's mother, expressed satisfaction, seeing in Elizabeth a solid and worthy figure. Though not of royal birth, her noble Scottish lineage and impeccable reputation made her an acceptable choice. For Elizabeth, agreeing to marry the prince did not mean giving up her essence, but rather taking on a new role with the conviction that she could exert a positive influence from within the institution. On the 26th of April, 1923, Elizabeth married Prince Albert at Westminster Abbey, in a solemn ceremony rich with symbolism. She was the first non-royal woman to marry a son of a reigning monarch since medieval times, although her aristocratic ancestry placed her firmly within the high nobility. The event was broadcast on the radio, a novelty at the time, allowing millions of Britons to hear the wedding vows, in a gesture symbolizing the modernization of the monarchy. Elizabeth wore a gown designed by Madame Handley Seymour, made of ivory satin, without excessive embellishment, but with the elegance that characterized the new Duchess of York. After the ceremony, the couple was greeted by cheering crowds in the streets of London, revealing the spontaneous affection that Elizabeth was already inspiring among the British people. Instead of placing her bridal bouquet on the altar, as was customary, Elizabeth laid it at the tomb of the unknown warrior in the abbey, in memory of her brother Fergus and of those who had fallen in the Great War. That gesture was widely appreciated by the public and reinforced the image of simplicity, sensitivity, and patriotism that she projected. After the ceremony, the royal couple did not depart immediately to exotic destinations as was tradition in some royal houses. Instead, they enjoyed a discreet honeymoon that began at Polesden Lacey, an elegant country residence in Surrey, and later continued at Glamis Castle, Elizabeth's family home in Scotland. This second stage was especially meaningful, as it allowed Prince Albert to bond intimately with Elizabeth's family and to understand more deeply the environment that had shaped her character. During their stay at Glamis, Albert was received with warmth and without rigid ceremony, which allowed him to relax and feel part of a genuine family atmosphere, something he had always longed for. For her part, Elizabeth used this period to further strengthen the bond between her family and her new husband, who shared her traditional values, her love for the Scottish countryside, and her need for emotional stability. During these days, far removed from royal protocol, the couple consolidated a relationship based on mutual affection and trust. Public life awaited them, but their marriage began rooted in privacy, familial affection, and shared heritage. On the 21st of April, 1926, Elizabeth gave birth to her first daughter, Princess Elizabeth. The child was named Elizabeth Alexandra Mary Windsor, in honor of her mother, her great-grandmother Queen Alexandra, and her grandmother Queen Mary. From the outset, young Elizabeth was raised in an atmosphere of tenderness and discipline, deeply shaped by the traditional values her mother deemed essential to the upbringing of a lady. Elizabeth did not fully delegate child-rearing to nannies, as was common among the British aristocracy, but was actively involved in her daughter's early education, teaching her from an early age the importance of responsibility, composure, and duty. The arrival of her daughter was a moment of intimate joy within the family and marked the beginning of Elizabeth's role as a mother within royal circles. During these years, her life remained relatively private and entirely devoted to the home. It was a period during which her daughter's future as queen was not yet foreseen, allowing her to be raised without the immediate pressure of the crown. 4 years after the birth of her first daughter, Elizabeth gave birth to her second daughter, Margaret Rose Windsor, on the 21st of August 1930, at Glamis Castle in Scotland. The birth was carefully overseen by a medical team dispatched from London, who travelled to the castle to ensure all conditions were met. This event carried historic significance, as Margaret became the first princess born in Scotland in over 3 centuries, a fact widely celebrated in the press and social spheres. Unlike her sister, who was born in an urban setting, Margaret came into the world surrounded by nature, tradition, and strong family ties. From the start, Elizabeth showed great affection for her younger daughter, who would go on to develop a more extroverted and artistic personality. The decision to give birth in Scotland was not merely circumstantial, but a reflection of Elizabeth's deep attachment to her Scottish roots and the symbolic significance of Glamis in her life. With Margaret's arrival, the family was complete, and Elizabeth fully embraced her role as emotional guide and central figure in the upbringing of her daughters. One of the most delicate aspects of the personal life of Prince Albert, Duke of York, was his chronic stammer, a speech impediment that had afflicted him since childhood and caused him great insecurity, particularly during public engagements. Elizabeth was, without a doubt, a decisive figure in her husband's progress in confronting this difficulty. Beyond her constant emotional support, it was she who firmly encouraged him to seek professional help, which led to his contact with Australian speech therapist Lyon, a specialist in speech disorders. Elizabeth took an active role in the process, attending some of the sessions, motivating the prince with breathing exercises, and even helping to create a safe and trusting environment in which he could practice without pressure. Her approach was not therapeutic, but emotional. Elizabeth believed that the most important thing was to strengthen her husband's self-esteem, and her method was based on affection, patience, and the conviction that he could overcome his fears. In the years preceding his accession to the throne, this support proved crucial for Albert to gain confidence in public speaking, a transformation that would not have been possible without his wife's constant encouragement and faith. In 1930, the British government, in agreement with King George V, offered Prince Albert the post of Governor-General of Australia, a prestigious position within the British Empire. The offer stemmed from a desire to strengthen ties with the Dominions, and it was believed that the Duke of York had the appropriate profile to represent the crown in such a distant land. The proposal was seriously considered by the prince, who saw it as an opportunity for institutional development. However, Elizabeth firmly opposed the idea of relocating the family to Australia, believing their place was in the United Kingdom. Her objection was not due to comfort or disdain for the country, but from a deeper conviction. She believed Albert should remain close to the core of the monarchy, especially given the frail health of King George V and the increasingly erratic behavior of the heir, Prince Edward. Elizabeth sensed that unforeseen responsibilities might arise, and moving to the other side of the world would mean distancing themselves from their central role as active members of the royal family. In the end, the offer was declined, and another official was appointed to the post. Years later, this decision would prove to be one of the most significant and far-sighted of their lives. Following the death of King George V on the 20th of January, 1936, the British throne passed to his eldest son, Edward VIII, a monarch whose personal life raised concerns both within the church and the government. His accession was met with reservations, partly due to his disregard for ceremonial duties and his close relationship with Wallis Simpson, an American socialite who had been divorced twice. In December of the same year, one of the greatest constitutional crises in modern British monarchy erupted. Edward VIII announced his decision to abdicate in order to marry Wallis, which was unacceptable under the rules of the Church of England, of which the monarch is supreme governor, and also to the government of the day, led by Stanley Baldwin. The abdication, formalized on the 11th of December, 1936, placed his younger brother, Albert, Duke of York, in direct line to the throne. Elizabeth, who until then had lived a relatively quiet life as Duchess, was suddenly transformed into Queen Consort of the United Kingdom. Her husband's accession to the throne under the name George VI was received with uncertainty by the public and with apprehension within the royal family itself, due to his reserved nature and long-standing struggles with public speaking. Elizabeth assumed her new role with calmness, tact, and resolve. She stood by him as he took his oath of service to the nation, helping him to bear the institutional pressure with discretion and constant emotional support. Edward's abdication not only disrupted the dynastic order, but completely altered Elizabeth's destiny, marking the beginning of her reign under unexpected circumstances of great political and personal complexity. On the 12th of May, 1937, Elizabeth was crowned Queen Consort of the United Kingdom at Westminster Abbey, in a solemn ceremony broadcast by radio and followed attentively by millions both in Britain and across the British Empire. The original date had been intended for the coronation of Edward VIII, but following his abdication, it was reproposed for the proclamation of George VI, with Elizabeth accompanying him in the ritual as a symbol of dynastic continuity. The ceremony was rich in religious and political symbolism, marking the formal beginning of the new reign. Elizabeth played a much more active role than traditionally assigned to consorts. She not only participated in rehearsals and preparations but also began taking on public duties with a clear intention of becoming a figure of national unity in uncertain times. Her serene demeanor, constant presence beside the new monarch, and her ability to connect with wide sectors of society began to forge a maternal image of strength that would endure throughout George VI's reign. From that moment onwards, Elizabeth was not limited to symbolic representation. She became involved in social work, official visits, and in building a genuine closeness with the British people. The outbreak of the Second World War on the 3rd of September, 1939, following Germany's invasion of Poland, marked a dramatic turning point for the British monarchy. Elizabeth, as Queen Consort, faced the challenge of maintaining the morale of a nation once again thrust into global conflict. In the early months of the war, the government considered evacuating the royal family for safety reasons. Discussions even included sending Princesses Elizabeth and Margaret to Canada. However, Queen Elizabeth strongly opposed the idea. Her firmness was immortalized in a public declaration: "The children won't go without me. I won't leave without the king. And the king will never leave." This statement had a profound impact on national morale, reinforcing the perception that the royal family would share the fate of their people during wartime. Elizabeth chose to remain in London alongside her husband, visiting hospitals, shelters, bombed neighborhoods, and factories, often at personal risk. Her courageous and compassionate attitude helped consolidate her image as the symbolic mother of the nation, capable of embodying dignity and resilience in the face of adversity. In September 1940, during the most intense phase of the German Blitz on London, Buckingham Palace was struck by 5 German bombs, one of which exploded in the inner courtyard, just a few meters from the royal apartments. At that moment, Elizabeth and King George VI were inside the palace. Although they were unharmed, the attack posed a clear threat to the royal family and their official residence. Far from prompting them to flee, the incident further strengthened Elizabeth's commitment to her country. She later declared, "Now I can look the East End in the face," referring to the working-class districts of London that had suffered devastating bombings. This statement, widely circulated by the press, reinforced her popularity as a symbol of civic resistance and closeness to the people. After the attack, Elizabeth continued her public engagements without interruption, visiting affected areas and speaking to families who had lost everything. Her presence on the streets, dressed modestly and without ostentatious escorts, was seen as an act of bravery and humanity. Her steadfastness in the face of danger was such that, according to British intelligence reports, Adolf Hitler referred to her as the most dangerous woman in Europe, fearing the moral impact her figure had on the British people. Amid the chaos and destruction, the Queen Consort became the emotional pillar of the country, embodying the spirit of resistance the nation needed. On the 6th of February 1952, King George VI died unexpectedly at his residence, Sandringham House, a victim of lung cancer that had worsened after years of personal strain during and after the war. He was only 56 years old. Elizabeth, who had been aware of his fragile health, was deeply affected. His death was a devastating personal blow, not only due to the loss of her husband, but also because of the close bond they had shared for nearly 3 decades. With his passing, their eldest daughter, Princess Elizabeth, acceded to the throne as Elizabeth II, while his widow formally adopted the title the Queen Mother to avoid confusion between the two. From then on, Elizabeth was no longer engaged in official duties as consort, but she did not fully retire from public life. In the days following the king's death, the nation united in mourning. Thousands of people came to London to bid farewell to the monarch at his lying in state. The Queen Mother, dressed in solemn black, led the ceremonies with a composure that impressed the public. Her serene and silent presence at the funeral marked the end of an era of sacrifice and duty, and the beginning of a new chapter for her as mother of the sovereign and guardian of the memory of George VI. On the 24th of March 1953, Mary of Teck, Queen Consort of the United Kingdom during the reign of George V and mother-in-law to Queen Mother Elizabeth, passed away. Even after being widowed in 1936, Queen Mary retained strong influence within the royal family and the public eye, being considered a key figure in the preservation of monarchical decorum, particularly during the abdication crisis of Edward VIII. Though they belonged to different generations, the Queen Mother always expressed respect for her, acknowledging her unshakable sense of duty, institutional strength, and deep commitment to the stability of the monarchy. The funeral was held on the 31st of March 1953, at St. George's Chapel, Windsor Castle. Queen Mary's death occurred just 2 months before the official coronation of Elizabeth II. However, Mary had been very clear in her final wishes. She did not want the ceremony postponed under any circumstances. She had expressed her desire for the coronation to go ahead as planned, even if she passed away beforehand, thus reaffirming her sense of duty over personal sentiment. That funeral marked the end of an era of consorts defined by strict protocol and institutional devotion. For the Queen Mother, it also represented a personal and symbolic closure, having shared pivotal moments of George VI's reign with her mother-in-law, and once again witnessing how the crown must prevail even amid mourning. After the death of George VI in 1952, the new Queen Elizabeth II, only 25 years old at the time, faced a transition to the throne burdened with institutional and emotional pressure. In that context, the Queen Mother assumed a crucial role as advisor, guide, and maternal figure, offering her daughter a source of experience and serenity in a setting governed by rigid expectations. Although the Queen Mother did not intervene directly in matters of state, her influence could be seen in the more personal aspects of the new reign. She gave advice on etiquette, protocol, and handling delicate situations. But above all, she provided a safe space where the young monarch could express herself without fear of judgment. She accompanied Elizabeth II to many events during the early years of her reign, never overshadowing her, and maintained a nearby residence from which she could assist when needed. The bond between mother and daughter grew even stronger after the king's death, not only as an emotional tie, but as a symbolic alliance between two generations of women of state. Thus, the Queen Mother became a discreet but constant presence in the new era of the British monarchy. During the 1960s and 70s, the Queen Mother witnessed the slow emotional and marital decline of her younger daughter, Princess Margaret, with whom she had always shared a special connection. Margaret, married since 1960 to photographer Anthony Armstrong-Jones, Earl of Snowdon, had begun her married life under intense press scrutiny and with high expectations, but the union soon began to show cracks. The Queen Mother watched with increasing distress as her daughter and son-in-law grew apart, and Margaret became progressively emotionally isolated, increasingly turning to nightlife, alcohol, and extramarital relationships that eventually harmed her public image. Though she tried to maintain family unity and offer comfort, the Queen Mother was also aware of the limits of her influence. The official divorce in 1978 was a painful event for the royal family, the first among close members in centuries, and represented a symbolic break with the traditional values she upheld. Elizabeth lived through this period with discretion, avoiding public statements, but her sadness was visible in her expression during family appearances. Margaret's fall, both personally and publicly, was a wound her mother never fully healed from. As she grew older, the Queen Mother continued to take an active interest in family matters and held firm opinions regarding the direction of the monarchy. One situation that particularly troubled her was the relationship between her grandson, Prince Charles, and Camilla Parker Bowles. Although she avoided direct confrontation, it was well known within royal circles that the Queen Mother disapproved of the relationship, partly due to its echoes of the 1936 abdication crisis, when Wallis Simpson, a divorced woman, triggered the abdication of King Edward VIII. Elizabeth believed that Camilla, also divorced and a controversial figure in the press, was not a suitable partner for the heir to the throne. Her view of monarchy was rooted in stability, impeccable public image, and respect for institutional duty. While she always remained polite and never expressed her disagreement publicly, her disapproval was common knowledge within her inner circle. The Queen Mother preferred to preserve family harmony, but she also believed in protecting the reputation of the crown. In 1966, at the age of 66, the Queen Mother was diagnosed with a malignant tumor in the colon. The news was handled with absolute discretion, and not even the press closest to the royal family had knowledge of the operation. The surgery was carried out at King Edward VII's Hospital in London, with a trusted medical team. The Queen Mother chose to keep the diagnosis private, not out of vanity, but because she wished to avoid public concern or any appearance of frailty at a time when the monarchy needed to project stability. The operation was successful and her recovery was rapid for a woman of her age. During her convalescence, only her closest circle was informed of the seriousness of the procedure. Neither her social engagements nor her public appearances were interrupted for long, which helped maintain the secrecy. This experience further cemented her reputation for quiet strength and marked the beginning of a stage in which, though increasingly elderly, she continued to exude remarkable vitality. News of the cancer only emerged years later, when medical archives were released with the royal family's consent. On the 28th of May 1972, the Duke of Windsor, formerly King Edward VIII, died in Paris. Though his abdication had drastically changed the lives of Queen Elizabeth and her husband King George VI, in time, formal tensions eased. The royal family allowed his remains to be returned to the United Kingdom for burial with honors. The funeral took place on the 5th of June 1972, once again at St. George's Chapel in Windsor, the traditional burial place of British monarchs. The Queen Mother attended alongside her daughter, Queen Elizabeth II, in a gesture of institutional reconciliation and duty. Although she had not maintained a close relationship with the Duke after the abdication, her presence at the service reflected respect for the monarchy and for familial bonds beyond the wounds of the past. The ceremony was discreet, with little media coverage, and the Queen Mother remained silent, visibly solemn. Her attendance marked a historic closure, witnessing the burial of the man whose decision had altered the course of her life and placed her in a role she never sought but served with unwavering loyalty. In 1984, at the age of 84, the Queen Mother underwent a second operation for cancer, this time in her breast, following the detection of a tumor during a routine medical checkup. As with her previous diagnosis, the matter was handled with utmost discretion and was never disclosed during her lifetime. The surgery again took place at King Edward VII's Hospital and was successful, although her recovery was slower due to her advanced age. During this period, Elizabeth reduced her public appearances, citing simply age-related fatigue, thus avoiding media speculation. She never allowed her illness to interfere with her symbolic duties or her involvement in charitable work. In fact, after the operation, she resumed her official activities with notable energy, once again demonstrating her well-known physical and mental resilience. This second experience with cancer further affirmed her resolve to preserve the dignity of the role, even without holding an active position in government. To many within the palace, her strength in facing illness was a reflection of the values of a generation shaped by war and sacrifice. On the 31st of August 1997, the tragic death of Diana, Princess of Wales, shocked the United Kingdom and the world. Although the Queen Mother had already withdrawn from public life, she attended the funeral held at Westminster Abbey on the 6th of September, standing alongside the royal family during one of the monarchy's most severe public image crises in decades. Seated beside Queen Elizabeth II, Prince Philip, and Princes William and Harry, the Queen Mother appeared visibly affected. Her presence in the Abbey was interpreted as a gesture of institutional and familial support, both towards her grandson Charles and her great-grandsons, who had just lost their mother in traumatic circumstances. Though she never spoke publicly about Diana or the media conflicts surrounding her, it is known that she maintained a respectful attitude toward Diana's role as mother of the heirs. At 97, the Queen Mother became a symbol of continuity and composure during a time of profound national grief, one of the last living representatives of an era when the monarchy met tragedy with silent dignity. On the 22nd of November 2001, at the age of 101, the Queen Mother made her final public appearance. She attended a private religious service held in the Royal Chapel of St. James's Palace in London. Her attendance coincided with a time of serious concern for the health of her younger daughter, Princess Margaret. That image became her definitive public farewell. Thereafter, her health declined significantly. When Princess Margaret died on the 9th of February 2002, the Queen Mother, despite her frailty, chose to attend the funeral held on the 15th of February at St. George's Chapel. She was discreetly transported in a vehicle with tinted windows, avoiding photography by express wish, and shielded from media exposure. She returned to Royal Lodge in Windsor, where she would not appear in public again. Her presence at the funeral was a silent maternal farewell, and it marked the last time she left her residence before passing away weeks later. On the morning of the 30th of March 2002, the Queen Mother passed away peacefully in her sleep at Royal Lodge in Windsor, aged 101 years and 238 days. At the moment of her death, her daughter, Queen Elizabeth II, was at her side, accompanying her in her final moments. Her passing occurred only weeks after Princess Margaret's funeral, in an atmosphere of quiet reflection. She had been cared for in the days leading up to her death by her usual medical team and long-serving staff. The royal household announced her death that same afternoon, via an official statement from Buckingham Palace, highlighting her role as a central figure of the 20th century. Her death marked the end of a generation of monarchy forged in duty, war, and resilience. In the days that followed, her coffin was transported to London and placed in state at Westminster Hall, where over 200,000 people queued to pay their respects. Her longevity, composure, and public image became permanently embedded in the collective memory of the United Kingdom as a symbol of dignity, strength, and unwavering commitment. On the 9th of April 2002, the Queen Mother's state funeral was held at Westminster Abbey, the same place where she had been crowned as Queen Consort 65 years earlier. The ceremony was attended by members of all European royal houses, international dignitaries, religious leaders, and thousands of ordinary citizens who followed the funeral procession through the streets of London. Queen Elizabeth II, visibly moved by the loss of her mother, and, weeks earlier, of her sister Princess Margaret, attended the ceremony. The coffin was draped in her personal standard and adorned with a wreath placed by her great-grandchildren. After the service, her remains were privately transferred to St. George's Chapel at Windsor Castle, where she was laid to rest in the royal vault beside her husband, King George VI. That same day, the cremated remains of Princess Margaret were also interred in an urn placed alongside those of her parents, fulfilling the wish for family unity beyond death. With that burial, the Queen Mother closed a historic chapter of more than a century, leaving behind a legacy of steadfastness, empathy, and quiet strength that defined the more human face of the British monarchy in the 20th century. Thank you for joining us to the end of the video. We hope you enjoyed it. If you have anything to add, feel free to share it with us in the comments section. Give us a like and share the link with your friends and family, so they can also learn more about the life of Elizabeth, the Queen Mother. Thank you for following us, and if you're not yet subscribed, we invite you to do so and activate the notification bell, as we regularly upload historical content that you'll find fascinating. See you in the next video.